This is the Mbari Review Podcast. I'm Chijioke Osuji, and in this episode, I'm doing a review of Living in Bondage, Breaking Free. So, the first thing I want to address is that I think the film propagates and reinforces many damaging stereotypes about Igbo people. And a lot of the investment in the story is in portraying them as these bloodthirsty, scheming, obnoxious ritualists who will do anything for money. And that's a common and prevalent theme in Nollywood films in general, one that you hope to see changes, but sadly continues to be reinforced. Um, and I think the dialogue was laden with that overly eccentric Igbo-ness that is just not real. A lot of the Igbo spoken, in fact, felt unnatural. And I think this was a high price to pay, just simply to qualify as a foreign language film. Okay, but just getting into some of the more technical aspects of the film, I would say, as for the cinematography, there's not much to say here really, except that now that we have managed to up our game on in terms of the quality of equipment that we use to film, I really cannot wait till Nigerian cinematographers leave the comfort zone of the basic, static shots and drone clips with no context, and maybe begin to offer more artistic experiences of the mise en scène and certainly more cohesion with the story itself. A lot is still lacking in terms of the more nuanced aspects of filmmaking, such as simple things like even just composition, But I guess props for shooting on a 4K camera or whatever. And I mean that with no disrespect. For the production, I would say that the filmmakers didn't pull any punches with the name dropping and brand advertisements. I have nothing against your marketing. I have nothing against paying marketing dues, but I think they could have been a little more subtle. At a point, it started to feel like a collage of ads and a kind of music video, and spoiler alert, but literally within the first 5 minutes of the film, one of the characters says, I work for Access Bank. And it's like, okay, I get it, Access Bank. And the other character responds by saying, oh, I'm into advertising, which I thought was just, ironic. Well, not really ironic, but just a weird tell. I'm surprised no one spotted that, But I understand that there are financial constraints and the need for concessions, right? The reason, however, it's so obvious in the film that you've made these concessions is because there's a lack of focus on the artistic expression of the film. To be honest, I can't remember the last Living in Bondage, so I cannot say how it stacks up against this one in terms of the acting, writing, or any of those other aspects that like just the minor details in acting and writing at least, which are areas I think that we can critique more sternly while recognizing some of the limitations that we used to have in terms of okay budget for more elaborate props or whatever. Although I think these days there is enough money for those things. It's just the appropriation of the resources is a little different from what is required to make good films. So I guess from a filmmaker perspective, there are aspects you can afford to not compromise on if your goal is to deliver on the film as a work of art. But it felt in this case like they prioritized it more as an ad more than anything else, with a few social labels on it, ritual killings, youth desperation, far-reaching evil in society, or whatever. But I mean, these are just themes that could have been further elaborated on in the course of telling the story. So I just felt like a lot of the meat was lost along the way because there's too much being considered along the way. There's too much being considered, and you deliberately kind of creates plot holes that become very evident in the final output, even without you realizing. For example, like how they went through the trouble of establishing Owerri in the picture, and then we don't get to experience anything else that says this is Owerri. In fact, it sounds more like Onitsha, and that's very very distracting. Like the characters are in Owerri, but they are speaking the Onitsha Igbo. It makes no sense. For the directing, I'd say, the little things matter a lot. And so do some of the more obvious things you take for granted. So the film is partly set in a way, and like I said earlier, the characters are speaking what sounds more like Onisha Igbo. I think the director should be in a position to point that out, and you know, I don't think it would have been too much of a task for the filmmakers to like consult on such details as important as language, right? And maybe either cast appropriately or pick the locations that match the dialects of their cast. I don't think it would have affected the story that much differently, but it was something that stuck out like a sore thumb, and it was not pleasant to see. They showed pictures of Owerri, but it sounded nothing like Owerri. I don't want to assume the worst or see it as a brazen lack of regard for the local audience, because as someone who's from Owerri, I just felt like, what's going on? Is it not Nigerians who made this movie? You're supposed to know this difference. Like for someone who's from that place, it kind of makes an impression. For the acting, I think Ramsey Noah has been on screen a long time, and I cannot recall a film where he has starred and failed to deliver. This was yet another convincing performance. However, I do not think it would help his future. However, I do think it would help his future projects, to cast supporting actors who can par his performances, or at the very least make their characters somewhat believable. Acting is an art, and when you have one or two supporting actors overdoing it on camera, it gets distracting. And there were so many examples in this case, especially with the guy who played the main character. And stuff like that just interferes with the experience of a film, no matter how many stars you have make, an impressive cameo or whatever. And at this point, I should say it was particularly a decent performance. It was a particularly decent performance by Munachi Abi and Ebele Okaro, who played the mother. I think she was, convincing enough in her role, or they were both convincing enough in those roles, in their respective roles. Despite the unconvincing performance by the lead. Okay, moving on, story and screenplay. I want to say, I know that this is an adaptation, so it's interesting kind of lumping story and screenplay together in the same category. It's an adapted screenplay, right? So, but I would say, there was some effort, albeit minimal, to address the social issues that the film was supposed to. I think they didn't go far enough to show those themes, especially for a 2.5 hour film. Beyond the predictability of the plot, which I won't bother to dive into, everything just seemed to have happened a little too quickly. Yet the film manages to be entirely too long for what little story we got. I can't tell. A lot is just happening back to back to back, and yet it's so long, and yet it's so little happening still. I don't know. It just felt really weird. And there's something else. Also, I'm not sure whose fault this is, but the subtitles say Igbo when the people speak Pidgin. I don't know whose job it was to clear that up, but maybe somewhere between the editor and the person who did the transcription, something got messed up. And I think for me, it's part of the screenplay. So, you take responsibility for that. And I was not impressed. Well, in the end, I'll just say I understand why they made the sequel. Living in Bondage is a title that's recognized by most Nollywood watchers, and I can definitely understand the desire to have it rake in some money in this century. But I sincerely hope that the makers are not contemplating yet another follow up on this franchise. It's simply not worth the trouble. Although, judging from that ending, I wouldn't be surprised to see yet another Living in Bondage in maybe a year or something. Would I nominate it for an Oscar? It did not at all come close to the levels, that are required to earn a nod, in my opinion. There's a lot I have to say, and maybe I'll just like follow up to this, but this has been my review of or at least a short, reasonably concise review of an excruciatingly long film titled Living in Bondage, Breaking Free. But anyway, kudos to those who made out time to go watch the film and keep supporting the industry, but I think you do need to demand more.